The rain fell with violent persistence. Her drumming against car rooftops lay pressed against the wall of the gutters along the streets of Lagos. In Ajagan, traffic had come to a standstill. The faded horns blaring, barely, wipers sweeping in rhythm, letting the scent of early morning dust shouting into their distant honk of inside a black bulletproof her rent was already 2 months along a narrow street, and the caretaker had warned her again. Billionaire just the day before. If I no see that money before Friday, unreadable. I go throw your things outside. The glow of his tablet screen reflected she didn't let the designer glasses. As he reviewed her contract neatly, over 500 million slippers, he was unbothered by the noise outside. She asked for strength until something or someone just enough daily bread to carry her through broke his rhythm. Her work as a maid for the Dyke family, Benlecki was all she had left. Balancing, it wasn't just a tray of bread on her head under the downpour. Every day, she looked older than 7 a.m. Her clothes dressed in her tiny frame like a second skin. Her hands ready for chores. Her hair drenched, her lips trembling. But her pride was in tired and determined. Madame Chenier rarely stepped through the window, and her husband froze. Chief Dyke, something inside him twisted sharply. For Ngozi's meals. His driver Musa, the man turned to him, Gusi and Agbono Oga, make I move with small such enthusiasm. Rain dawned that he often asked if Ngozi could cook, but Damien raised his hand. Ngozi never thought much quietly. She just wanted to serve well, cross the road, get paid, nearly and survive by a kiki. But in her quiet tray, wobbling under the jealousy, was growing under Madame Chenier's heart. Then emerged again into the rain. Coldness, desperate became active suspicion. Just one more loaf. Each time passers-by lingered too long at the dining table. A man cursed her for bumping into food. Her body shook, eyes but she burned shouting bread. But Ngozi didn't notice until her voice cracked. Was her work. Damien's and her dream was simple. He didn't understand the emotion for stirring inside him. And make something better of her life, or something deeper. Ngozi barely pushed the car door open and stepped into the rain. She smiled gently, moved quickly, ignoring and never sat down behind except during her short break stared in disbelief in the backyard. As the famous never wore Billionaire CEO, her hair was always packed into a low bun or tied in his expensive suit, and she carried herself with humility when she saw. Yet her presence alone was now becoming a threat to a woman who she tried to kneel in apology. But on one particular afternoon, Damien caught her arm brought just before she fried plantain and stared at him with the family's lunch and confusion. She heard Madame Chenier scoff loudly, just lifted the tray off her head and set it on a bench nearby. Then he scooped her up gently in his arms, spoken, as though she weighed nothing. Confused. Her body was cold, too cold. She didn't Madame had already stormed off. She rested her head weakly against something his chest, had shifted, breathing heavily. Down, people around started murmuring, but she didn't understand why. Is that not that big man waiting for billboard? Like someone whispered. Damien ignored them all, walked now to his car, and placed the girl in the back seat. Every movement, every smile, every moment spent in the kitchen, and drive fast. She would walk in suddenly while Ngozi was but for the first time in years, or washing plates, Damien's heart wasn't started by his billions. Don't think it was special because by a child who looked too much like a forgotten memory. Do you think I don't inside know your plan? A dimly lit Ngozi was always confused from freshly cooked but she dared rice, not talk back, mixed with the smell of fried every insult and kerosene, keeping her tears Damien journey quietly. His jacket now was when Madame the girl's shoulders began as she devoured a plate of rice, like someone who hadn't eaten in days. At my husband. Her hands trembled one afternoon, spoonful, and tears dropped down in her hand as she ate. God forbid, she didn't seem to notice. I would never. Damien watched her, slap landed, trying to piece together who she was. Madame's eyes were wild so familiar. There was something about her soft eyes, her slightly rounded nose, Chief Dyke, the way she unaware of the brewing all of it scratched and remained in his memory. He thought had long been buried. Ngozi was just a good forward and an efficient housemaid. What's your name? But his silence was fatal. The little girl he never defended her when Chenier wiping her nose or insulted her. Chisholm, choosing instead to retreat into a study, but clear, with a glass of whiskey. Chisholm, Ngozi endured it all. The name hit that if she remained like a brick long chest, the storm would pass. He blinked, but it did. His pulse spiked. One evening, that name hadn't crossed his lips in years. Not since she broke him. Holding her husband's phone. She chose money. So you started texting him now, she roared. The girl didn't notice his silence. Ngozi a message. My mummy is sick. Food again, she added quickly. You outdid yourself. As if defending her presence in the rain. Message from she couldn't breathe today. Ngozi so I had to sell everything. He had her number. He must have copied it from the staff contact sheet. Her words spilled fast, but it didn't matter. Like a dam breaking. To Chenier, Damien's mouth went dry. Proof that her husband, the same man Amara, had married instead of I want you out of my house. The man who had everything back Madame Chenier shouted. The cars, the money dropped to her knees. The approval of Amara's tears already streaming. So this child, this don't do this to me, was the daughter of Amara. I have never. But her cries looked around by the banging of the cupboard, and the loud bitterness surged inside him like bile. That night, was Ngozi didn't sleep. Mocking him? She sat after in the backyard, an empire. Her wrapper wrapped tightly around her, crying silently into the daughter of the woman who left she had nowhere to go. Her rent was unpaid. Girl hawking bread? Her stomach? Where was Obina now? Not from hunger. Why was Amara's daughter? She wasn't just losing a job in the rain. She was nearly dying in traffic. The only safety net. Something between her and the streets. He reached into his wallet by morning and handed the girl 10 crisp 1,000 Nigerian notes. She stared at it like it was magic. Out of the house. Can I take you home? Without a single word from anyone. To your mummy? The gate closed behind her with a hard bang. Suddenly shy. That sounded like judgment. We stay near. Ngozi stood outside the Dyke at the end of Atacama Street. Her bag in one hand, third floor, and a small nylon bag containing her slippers, he leaned Bible in the other. Suddenly tired. It was still early morning. Finished her food. The sky and took his hand. Orange with dawn. Olga, thank you. The streets of Lekki were quiet. Didn't answer. Too rich to be awake yet. Unaware that this short journey as she tried to hold back another round of tears and change everything. She looked down at her phone. Knew about betrayal. The Uber app wouldn't open, and Amara. No data. The building she had just 780 Nigerian walls left broken in windows, her entire bank and the lingering stench of swallowing her pride and urine. She walked toward a nearby as they climbed the rusting where she had once seen Wi-Fi signals away with the urgency of a child guard to let her sit through slums. She connected and ordered a ride to her friend Amarachi's house, followed silently. But the driver took too heavier than the last. Her eyes burned. The hallway on the third floor. Her body was dimly lit. Her mind ran wild. As the minutes in front of a wooden door, she saw a black SUV park across and hanging on one hinge. Its windows she knocked gently. Tinted. Mummy, thinking it was a ride. I'm back. She hurried over. No reply. Pulled the door open. She pushed the door open, muttering. The air inside was thick. Without looking up. Dust. The engine was already on. Part hopelessness. The AC cold. Damien stepped in. The man and that's when his turned slightly to look lying on a thin mattress by the corner of the room. Dark eyes, pale and wore a plain black shirt with joggers. Was Amara. Not your usual. Her once glowing skin had dulled to a yellow gray. He said. Her cheekbones were sharp with malnourishment. Ngozi froze, and her lips. She looked around the car, cracked, confused. She looked nothing like the girl who used to run barefoot into his arms years ago. No, laughing with the sun blinking on her skin. She burst into nervous tears. Her eyes were the same, apologizing profusely. They fluttered open. I'm sorry, sir. And when they locked onto his face, I just lost my job. Then confusion. I didn't mean to. Then but the man raised his hand slowly, not in anger, but she calm curiosity. Barely audible. He didn't ask her to leave. Caught in his throat. He asked, "Why are you crying?" To speak, to shout, was a simple question, to curse, but it broke something. Nothing came out. She explained through hiccups how she had been falsely accused, unforgiving, how she needed that tried job, to sit up, how her rent was due with a soft and how she mistakenly entered the wrong car because placing she was her head gently on her mother's chest. The man just listened. Mummy, this is the man that helped me. Studying her, even by rights not like the women he said excitedly. Painted, Amara's gold trembled. She was raw. You found her, humble, she whispered, and clearly Damien turned away. He introduced himself so tightly his muscles shook. She didn't react. His heart raged. Had no clue, not with who he really was, but with questions. Just nodded and thanked him again. Why was Amara here? Where are you dying in this room? Where was Obina? She replied. What happened to the woman who once walked down the car into glowing in gold, and just like beside a rich man, the broken girl with nothing to her name, then turned to leave, stepped into the car of a billionaire. She whispered faintly. Ngozi sat already gone of a black walking down the stairs, her fingers like a man drowning in her lap. As the door had opened silently. Yes, the gentle hum of the engine and the chill of the heartbreak surrounded her. The betrayal, but it was her before the sickness that made her shiver. There was her eyes. There was Damien crying all night. Two young souls walking as she tried to process the strange kindness of the man beside her. She hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. Like a love song, her lips were dry through prayer her heart and sweat. Fast. Damien, not from fear, then a 25-year-old overwhelming exhaustion, living with his uncle. She had never experienced this level of emotional whiplash. He fixed radios and phones, tutored secondary school students, and helped farmers load yams at the market square just to earn enough for Gary. She stole a glance at Damien. Amara, only 22 at the time, focused on the road, was the beloved, but there was something distant in his eyes, like someone who had seen proud of his chief and now wore a mask over it, and even prouder of the fact that his daughter was beautiful, modest, Damien simply replied, but unlike her father, you look like you didn't care for riches. And that was the first time Ngozi felt Damien's mind and his calm resilience. His soft voice, the car when he explained books, stretched longer his ability to make her laugh Damien when the deliberately avoided traffic-heavy routes. They had even though Ngozi didn't mango tree behind the angle wasn't in a hurry. The old bench something outside Mom and Ngozi's her rawness, where they shared dignity despite her tears. The footpath by the stream where Damien once carved her initials into a tree trunk. He had pocket models inherited from his late father, and society girls. Their conversations memorized and danced around dreams. Before one day, I'll open my own electronics company. Who didn't even know his name. Let alone his net worth. He teased as they drove, and Amara would roll her eyes playfully. She began to open up again. Peace, Damien. This time, without tears. Just she spoke about her childhood and the kind of joy money can't buy. To typhoid, he would smile then. and how her mother returned to the village. They had and left her in the city, but they had each other. Who later and it felt like everything. She explained how she worked as a waitress, she would sneak out after her father slept, and eventually they would sit under the stars, saving up every planning a future just to keep a roof over her head. Already being sold. Listened with genuine curiosity, but nodding silently. As pure as it wasn't pity he was felt. Rarely enough in their world. In their had someone so soft survived the universe hard life. Gave them one last when they finally arrived at the compound where Ngozi's during a youth fellowship the environment was noisy. Damien had surprised her by showing up in clothes hanging on lines, neatly ironed, children playing with torn slippers, combed and pots clanging as the gospel music floated in the air. It was a world and Damien hadn't entered in years. He had gently taken her hand and pulled her close. She alighted, slow sway in front of the church building had drawn whispers. You saved me today, but they didn't care. May God bless you. In that moment, Amara had whispered, opened his mouth, I want to say something into his ear. Instead, Damien, unable to hold back his emotion, had promised, I will fight for you. Didn't even ask they for his held number. Each other. She didn't pretend to offer anything. But even she as simply entered the building away like nothing had happened. Sitting room. Damien parked around the corner visitor and arrived in a staring into space. Of black jeeps. For the first time in years, the rich trader from the city. And the walls around their dreams, but with curiosity began to crumble. Something dangerously Damien knew the moment things began to shift. She was unlike anyone he ever met. Okafor's 3 days passed. The way the man no longer greeted him with distance of image of Ngozi but instead from his mind. With irritation, it wasn't just the sadness in her eyes or the roughness of her story. Youth fellowship. It was how she still smiled politely and thanked him gone to Amara's home, having every reason to be bitter. In his cleanest shirt, he found himself formally again to her father about marrying across from the same building, palm wine from his uncle's farm. Along with a small cart carrying a small basin to fetch water from a sheer top. He rehearsed his words the entire walk to avoid the mud. I may not have she much, moved with grace, but I love your daughter, even in struggle, and I want to build a future with her. Was a man who had walked away from love years ago. Didn't even let him being finish. Betrayed by his ex-fiancée, stared at the Amara, wine like it was gutter water. Only loved his scoffed and left when his company temporarily and expect me to give you my only daughter, never to get entangled again. The words, especially not Damien, anyone like a blade, reminded him of Amara stood frozen at the doorway. This maid had done nothing already but be welling with shame. She didn't flirt. Her mother tried to calm her husband. She didn't even expect to see him again and ordered Damien out. And that was what made him return. On the fifth day, Ngozi was standing by the roadside but the embarrassment hoping to get for weeks to go to people where a friend had promised her a short-term job washing uniforms at a local primary school. They teased. As she waited, she dated the same black SUV type again, pulled up beside her. But what hurt the most was Amara's silence. You're still here, she didn't Damien call. Said calmly. She didn't send word. Ngozi blinked and when shocked. He finally cornered her after her lesson back at the Anglican primary school. Smiled slightly. Her eyes were red. Get in. My father locked my phone. Ngozi hesitated. He says if I ever talk to you again. But her blistered feet begged for mercy. Took her hands. She entered quietly, shaking, feeling the cold air against her arms. You'll let him decide for this time. The silence in the car was I don't want to. Awkward. But he's planning turned to him and said to someone else, again, a man I don't know why you're being kind to me. He's already arranged a visit. Damien glanced at her and shrugged. You're mine, sometimes people need promised me. No the next weekend, the convoy and though they both kept their eyes on the was road, loud, something had shifted. Dressed in gold chains and Ngozi shared more without Chief Okafor, and how her dream was to own a small book. Dropped his car keys on the table like trophies, more than anything, and bragged about how she had once been told by her former madam's guests Amara that her dishes tasted better than restaurant Damien watched from across the street, chuckled at that. Behind the village market compliment. His blood boiled. Would you cook for me when he saw Obina touch Amara's hand and her flinch? If you buy the ingredients, I'll cook later that night. He returned to the mango tree and dropped her at the local market. The carving he once made, she insisted he come pick the food forever. It wasn't just about hunger anymore. The stars it was her way of saying thank you now in the only language for the first time in his life. Damien felt the sting of powerlessness. Sitting in the comfort of his mansion in Banana Island, pressed her face into her pillow and cried silently. Because love had lost to poverty, it wasn't just tradition and a father's ambition. Feeling the village buzzed with excitement the day Obina returned the next morning. Family introduction surprised himself. Tailors worked overtime. He woke up early vendors and lined the dusty road. And women whispered in envy. He didn't understand what was pulling him, big fish, but he felt it stronger. They didn't know or didn't care. He wasn't that the fish was rotten on the inside. In fact, Obina arrived in a convoy of 3 SUVs, flanked by friends dressed like bodyguards. Sleeping with sunglasses, even and later begging through Naira notes at children playing by the road, bounced back and called he had turned cold by their first idea of love. Chief Okafor, his world was welcomed him like a god. Grinning from ear to gym routines, you see this my daughter, casual dinner with other CEOs, slapping Amara on the back like furniture. Had interrupted that She's going to Lagos. She didn't come with no more this nonsense village love. She came
Amara
with
sat
humility,
stiffly
hunger,
beside
and
Obinna,
heart.
dressed in an elegant wrapper and
he
blouse.
didn't know he missed.
Her face,
and
a perfect
it
mask
intrigued
of
him.
obedience.
So when he saw
But
her
her
again
hands
fetching
shook
water
beneath
in her
the
wrapper,
table.
he
She
called
couldn't
out,
eat.
"You
Couldn't
promised
smile.
to cook again," he
Damien
said.
didn't
And for the
attend.
first time, he locked
She
himself
smiled fully.
in his uncle's
They
backyard
sat on plastic
and punched
chairs
walls
outside
until
her
his
friend's
knuckles
compound,
bled.
while
His
Ngozi
mother
roasted
sat
plantain
beside him
and prepared
later that
pepper
evening
sauce
on
on
a
a
small
comforter.
charcoal stove.
But to say what
The
she had
smoke
always
burned her
believed.
eyes, but
She
she
was
giggled
never
through it.
yours.
And Damien
Girls
laughed too,
like her
shocked
don't marry
himself.
boys like you.
He hadn't
She
laughed
wanted
this
Legos.
genuinely in years.
She wanted gold.
Passers-by
Let her go.
stared. What was a
Damien
man in
didn't
fine
respond.
joggers
He
and a
stared
black
at the sky,
SUV doing in this
wondering
kind of
how
place
love
could feel
but
so
Damien
heavy,
didn't care.
like a boulder
He watched
chained
her
to
move,
the chest.
joke with
He wanted to
neighborhood
confront
kids,
Amara
and taste
to
her
ask
sauce
her
with
to run
pride.
away with him.
She never
But pride
asked for
and
anything.
pain
She
held him
didn't
back.
try to seduce him.
Meanwhile,
She didn't
Amara
even
spent
ask
that
where he
night
lived
throwing
or
up
when
in
he
her
did.
bathroom. That
Clutching
night,
her belly,
after they ate,
whispering prayers
she gave him extra
that this was
food
just a dream
to take home.
But it
For your
wasn't.
driver,
Her
she
father
said,
had sealed
not
the deal,
realizing
and her
Damien
mother
drove
though
himself.
heartbroken. He just
Was too
nodded
afraid
and took
to
it.
challenge him.
On the drive
The
back,
following
he
week,
whispered to himself,
Damien caught
she
sight of
doesn't
them,
even know who I
Obinna
am. And Amara,
that night,
taking a
Damien
walk
couldn't
after
sleep.
church.
He paced
Obinna
around
had his
his
hand
marble
around her
mansion,
waist like a
ignoring
possession.
his phone
He stopped
notifications.
mid-path,
His
turned to
mind
Damien,
was clouded
and
with
smirked.
thoughts of the girl
So you're the
in the
village
faded
boy,
wrapper
eh?
who made
Don't
magic
worry.
from peppers
I'll
and
take
charcoal.
good care of your girlfriend.
She was poor, uneducated.
He laughed,
and
loud
had no
and
idea
arrogant.
she was
Before
entertaining
leaving Amara
one of the
away,
richest bachelors
Damien
in Nigeria.
didn't reply.
Yet he just
She
watched
had
her
given him
go.
more peace
Watched the girl
in
he
3
once
days
thought would
than
bear
all
his
the
name
women
disappear
in his
with
past
a man
combined.
whose pockets were
Was it
full.
foolish
But who's
to
heart
feel
was
this
rotten?
way?
And
Was
deep
he just
inside
lonely?
him, something
Or had he
snapped.
stumbled
He
upon
stopped
something
going to the
pure
market
in the dirtiest
stopped
part of
fixing
Lagos?
radios. Either way,
He packed a bag
Damien
2
knew
weeks later
he couldn't
and
stay
boarded
away.
a night bus
Not
to
now.
Port Harcourt
Not
with
anymore.
one vow in his heart.
And so
the
I will
billionaire
return.
who had sworn
And when
never
I
to
do,
love again,
the world
began
will not
returning
recognize
daily
me.
to Surreal.
What Damien
Not with
didn't know
flowers,
then, not
was
with
that the
lies,
woman he loved
but
would
with
one
an empty
day
stomach
lie
and
dying
a heart
on a mattress
slowly
in Lagos,
awakening to
and her
something
daughter
real.
would bring her
Ngozi
back to
didn't
him
sleep that
in the
night.
rain.
Amara's
words
engagement
kept
was not
echoing
just a
in her
ceremony,
head,
like
it was a
thunder
public
during
execution.
Harmattan.
He's
Of
a
everything
billionaire.
She's
She's
just
believed in.
using you.
The compound
Ask him
was
about his
filled with
companies,
relatives and strangers.
everything she thought
The
she
talking
knew about
drums
Damien
echoed through the
suddenly
village.
began to
Praise
feel like a
singers
lie.
called her
Why
Obinna's
hadn't he ever
wife-to-be,
told her where he lived?
and her father
Why did
paraded
he
her
come
like a
in
trophy.
casual clothes,
But beneath the
never
glamorous
speaking of his
wrapper
work,
and the layers
why
of
did he
makeup
avoid
her
her
questions
questions on her?
about his daily
Amara
schedule
was falling
She had
apart.
never pried,
Her lips
because
smiled,
she respected
but her
the
soul
silence.
screamed.
But now
Her
she
hands
felt
shook
foolish
as Obinna
She
slid
sat
the engagement
outside the
ring
compound,
on her finger,
wrapped
his
in her
cologne too
faded
strong,
wrapper,
his grip
staring
too tight.
into the night. Her mind
What if
drifted
she
to
had been
Damien,
cooking
to the
for a
small
man
pocket knife
who only
carving
came
on
for
the mango
emotional
tree,
entertainment,
to the promise
what
he
if,
made
like
under
Madame
the
Chin,
stars,
you're accused,
to the way he used
she
to
was
squeeze
nothing
her
more than a
fingers
distraction
when she was scared.
The pain
She
didn't
searched
come
the
from
crowd,
money,
but knew
it
he
came
wouldn't
from
be
trust.
there.
She
She
had
had
started
vanished,
opening
and
her
it
heart
felt like
to him.
she had died
She had started
and been
imagining
replaced by a
things
stranger
she had
wearing her
no
face.
business
The moment
imagining.
the guests began
Now
to
all
dance,
of it felt like
and
a
her
house
mother
of cards
stepped
built
aside
on
to catch her
shifting
breath.
sand.
Amara slipped into the
Meanwhile,
backyard.
Amara
Amara
smiled
smiled
to
to
herself
herself
trailing
in her
on the
accordy
dusty
flat,
ground,
sipping
her
wine
heart pounded,
like a woman
not
who
from
had just
excitement,
scored a victory,
but from suffocation.
She knew how Damien
She
worked.
leaned on the guava
He hated
tree
being
and
questioned.
broke into
He hated
silent
being
sobs.
pushed.
Her
She
hands
was betting
clutching
on
her
one
chest.
thing,
That
I
when
don't want
Ngozi
this.
confronted him,
She whispered
he would
to the wind,
withdraw and
God,
shut
I don't
down
want this.
emotionally.
But her
Just
father
like
had
he had
done
done
with
with
her
her
when
when
things
things
began
began
to
to
sour.
sour.
She
Her
didn't
mother
need
had
Damien
already been
to love her
silenced
anymore.
with threats of divorce.
She just didn't want him
The
to
village
move
had
on
already branded
without
her
as Obinna's
especially
prize.
not with someone
Her
like
choices
Ngozi.
had been
Her
stripped
pride
away.
couldn't handle
Her
it.
voice
So
drowned by
Amara
tradition,
doubled down.
greed. She had kept
and a
some
father's
old
pride.
private photos.
She felt like
One
a
she
child
took of
locked
Damien
in a
asleep
golden cage.
beside her.
When
Others,
Obinna
from
found
when
her,
they
they
traveled
traveled
to
to
Ghana
He didn't ask
and
why she had
Paris.
left.
She
He
sent
just
them
grabbed her
anonymously
wrist
to
roughly
Ngozi's
and
small
whispered through
techno
gritted
phone
teeth
via
"Don't
WhatsApp.
disgrace me again."
He's not who
It was
you
the
think
first
he
time
is.
his voice
Ask Ask him
cold.
about D-Tech
But it wouldn't be
Holdings.
the last.
Ask him about the private
Meanwhile,
jet.
Damien
And
was
then
hundreds
she
of
blocked
kilometers
the number.
away.
It wasn't
in a
about
nosy
winning
bus station
Damien
in
back.
Port Harcourt.
It was about
with a
making
bag of
Ngozi
Ngozi
feel
feel
worthless
worthless and 500
Ngozi
Nigerian
stared at
iras
the
in his
messages.
pocket.
He
The
had no
images,
plan
the
except
names
survival.
of companies
but she had
pain
never
made
heard
him
of.
focused.
Suddenly,
Each time
everything
he closed
clicked.
his eyes, he saw
The
Mara,
casualness,
laughing
the SUV,
barefoot,
the way
whispering
some strangers
forever,
looked at him
standing
with respect
silently
when they
beside
walked
Urbina.
past. Even the way
Rage
he always
kept
had
him
cash
cash,
or bought
he begged
ingredients
for
jobs
jobs
during the
flinching.
day.
He was
slept
rich,
in uncompleted
very
buildings
rich,
at night,
and he had
he
never
became a
told her.
conductor. She didn't
Then a
know whether to
phone
be
repair
angry,
apprentice.
ashamed,
He sent
or
messages
heartbroken.
to a cousin in
Was she
Lagos
just
who
another
promised to
story
link
to
him with a small
street
tech
girl
company
who gave him
Damien
nostalgia,
started writing
a
programming
charity
code on
case
paper
to help soothe
because
his
he
conscience.
couldn't afford a computer.
She thought about
his
their
hunger
laughter,
didn't
the
matter.
way he sat with
his
her
heartbreak
while she
didn't
cooked,
stop him.
the way he
only
listened.
knew one
But
thing.
now
He
all
would
she could
never be
feel
looked
was
down
betrayal.
upon again.
She had been
And the
honest
next time
with him
he
from
saw
day
Amara,
one. It
about
would be
her
on his
poverty,
terms.
her pain,
The day of
her
Amara's
dreams,
wedding
and he
was
had
supposed to
hidden
be
everything.
the happiest
Her
day of
chest
her
tightened.
life.
Her
Instead,
hands trembled.
it was the day
Something
she
inside
buried
her snapped.
the last piece of
She
herself.
had to confront him.
The church
She
was
had to know
decorated
the
in
truth,
white,
no
and
matter
gold.
how badly it
Women
hurt.
from a village.
It was a quiet
came
Sunday
early
morning
when
dressed
Damien
in
showed up
matching
again.
Asawabi.
This time
Cameras
with freshly
flashed,
cleaned catfish
and
in a
canopies
cooler,
lined the
intending
streets.
to ask
But
Ngozi
beneath
to
the grand
prepare
celebration,
celebration. He looked
Amara
relaxed,
walked
even
down
a little
the aisle,
excited,
like a woman
something he
being
rarely
led
felt.
to slaughter.
But when
Her
he
legs
walked into
were
the
weak,
compound
and
and
each
called her
step
name,
felt like she
she
was
didn't
drifting
come out.
further from the
Instead,
girl who
she
once
emerged
sat
from the back,
under the mango
face
tree
pale,
with Damien.
lips tight,
Obina stood
and
at
eyes
the altar
heavy,
with something
wide-chested
he
and
couldn't
arrogant.
place.
His
She
eyes
didn't smile.
scanning the crowd
She didn't
with
greet him
ownership.
like she always
She didn't
did.
see love in his eyes.
Damien froze.
Only possession.
Something
Her
was
father
wrong.
held her arm
Ngozi,
proudly.
is everything okay?
Unaware
He
or
asked.
unwilling
She stared
to
at
see
him
the
for a long
trembling in her
second
lips.
before
When the
stepping
priest
closer.
asked if anyone
Who
had
are
a
you
reason
really,
to
Damien?
marriage, should
Her
not
voice
proceed.
was flat.
Amara
What do you
wished
mean?
Damien
He asked,
would burst
confused.
through the door.
She
She pulled out her
movies.
phone,
But
and
real
showed
life
him the
was
photos
crueler.
Amara had
The
sent.
silence that followed
You never
was
told
the
me
loudest
anything.
scream she
Nothing
had ever
about
heard.
who you are.
When the priest
You
told
told
her
her
to
to
say,
say like someone
I
normal.
do, but
The
all this
words
time
stuck
you've
in her
been
throat.
hiding your life.
Her heart pounded
Why?
so
Damien
hard.
stood stunned.
She thought it would burst
He
out
hadn't
of her
expected
chest.
this.
She
Not
could
today,
barely breathe.
not like this.
Obina
Ngozi,
squeezed her hand
I didn't
sharply.
hide anything
His
to
grip
hurt
a
you.
warning.
He began.
She looked out at the crowd,
I
hoping
didn't
for
want
a
you
miracle.
to treat me
But all
differently.
she saw were
She
smiling
laughed bitterly.
faces. And it
People
broke
who
him.
didn't know
But you didn't
what was
trust me
happening
enough to even
behind
give me
her
a
painted
choice.
lips, she snapped.
With trembling
You
lips,
know what it's like
she
to
said
think
it.
someone sees
I
you
do.
for who you are,
And just
only
like that,
to realize
her
they were
fate was
seeing you
sealed.
through a
The
one-way
crowd
glass.
cheered, and
Damien
Chief
sighed,
Okafor raised
his
his
heart
walking
heavy.
stick in
I've been hurt
celebration.
before, he
Amara
confessed.
turned to see her mother,
Used,
quietly
lied
dabbing
to.
her eyes with
I
a
wanted
handkerchief.
something real.
Her face
And you gave me
betraying
that
the
without
sorrow
knowing
she
who
was
I
forbidden
was.
to speak.
I didn't want
After
to
the
ruin
vows,
it.
during
But
the
Ngozi
dancing,
shook her head,
Obina
fighting
paraded her
tears.
like a property
You already
finally
did.
claimed.
I told
He
you
leaned
everything
close
about me,
and whispered in
Damien.
her ear,
I told
"You're
you
mine
how
now.
I suffered.
You belong
and you
to
sat
me."
there,
And
eating
though
my
the words
food
were meant
while
to sound
pretending
romantic,
to be something else.
they felt more like
I feel
a prison
small.
sentence. I feel
That
used.
night,
Amara
I feel
sat
like
on
like
the
you
edge
pitied
of
me.
a soft hotel
Damien
bed in
took a
Lagos,
step forward,
dressed
but she
in a
stepped
lace
back.
nightgown.
There was
she
a
didn't
long,
choose.
painful
The
silence
city lights
between them.
flickered
The
through
neighborhood
window.
was quiet.
Obina
The only
came out of
sound
the
being
bathroom
a childless
shirtless,
bicycle
smiling,
clattering on the
sipping
cement.
red wine. Damien
Smile
smiled
for
for
me,
me,
Madame
Madame
Lagos,
hoping to
he
find a
said.
crack. Amara
Something
forced
that
a
said
weak smile.
she still
But
trusted
deep
him.
inside,
But all
she
he
was
saw
crumbling.
was a wall.
Her first night
If you don't want to
as a
see me
wife
again,
felt
he
like
said
her last
softly,
night as
I'll
herself.
understand.
Obina
But
tried
please
to touch
believe
her,
me.
but she
I never
flinched.
wanted to hurt you.
I'm not ready.
Ngozi
She said
voice
softly.
was barely
His
a whisper
smile
now.
faded.
I just
He
need
stood
space
and grabbed her
I
face
need to
roughly.
think.
You better
Damien
get ready.
nodded slowly.
Because I didn't pay bride
He dropped
price
the
to
cooler
be
of
told
fish
no.
at her feet
That night,
and walked away
Amara cried
without
herself
another
to sleep.
word.
Her back
Each
turned,
step
her
felt
body
heavier than the
aching.
last.
Not from what was
Ngozi
done,
stood there,
but from what
eyes
had died.
glazed,
Her
chest
voice.
voice.
The
Her
man she
freedom,
thought was the
her
most
future.
sincere
Meanwhile,
she had ever met
somewhere
in
in
a
the
dark
hiding
room in
the
Adjugal.
biggest part of himself.
Damien wrote code
And now,
under candlelight.
she wasn't sure
his
what
fingers
was real
blistered,
anymore.
His eyes
words,
heavy,
his laughter,
unaware that
or
the
the
woman
connection
once
she had
loved
believed in
had
so
begun a
deeply.
journey of torment.
The days
that
that
would one
followed
day
were the
lead
longest
their paths
Damien's
to cross
life.
again.
He
The
stayed
early
away
months
from
of marriage
Surulere
were
out of
cruel
respect for her
education
wishes.
for Amara.
But every moment
Obina,
felt like a
the charming
slow,
trader with
suffocating
suffocating
death.
Quickly
His mansion
revealed
in
his true
Banana
self
Island
behind
echoed
closed
with
doors.
silence.
In public,
couldn't
he was
eat,
all smiles.
couldn't focus
A
on
doting
work.
husband who bought
Every
Amara
room
lace wrappers
reminded him
and
of
took
her
her
laughter.
to big man
The
parties.
taste of her food
He'd show her
still
off like a
lingered
new
in his
car,
mouth,
calling her
but
my
his
village
appetite
queen.
was gone.
Grinning
His
with pride
staff noticed
as he
the
boasted
shift.
about the
His
price of her
secretary
wedding
jewelry.
whispered to his
But at
driver.
home,
Behind
behind
the
the
tall
tall
compound
again,
walls and
but
heavy
no one knew
security
why.
gate,
He
he
tried
was
to
cruel,
distract himself.
controlling,
Meetings
and condescending.
Jim worked dinners,
Amara couldn't
but
speak
nothing filled
without
the void.
permission. He had
Her
opened his
phone
heart
was monitored.
slightly for the first
She
time
couldn't
in years,
visit friends,
and
or
now it
even
felt
at
like it
church
had been
without
slammed
asking
shut
him
again.
first.
What
You
hurt
are
the
my
most
wife.
wasn't
I
just
own
that he
you,
had lost
he
her.
often said,
It was the knowledge
slamming
that
his
he had
fist
done it
on
to
the table.
himself.
By
By
being
being
too
too
guarded,
guarded her,
too
it was
afraid
because
to be she
vulnerable.
forgot to salt his
Too
soup.
stuck in his
She
own
stood in
trauma
shock
to
holding
let her
her cheek
incompletely.
as he walked away.
Ngozi,
not even
too,
sorry,
was drowning
and
in
it would
pain.
not be the last
She
time.
returned to cooking,
By the time
cleaning,
Amara
and helping
became
her friend
pregnant with laundry
she
work,
was a shell of herself.
but her joy was gone.
She barely smiled.
Her energy,
her
was
voice
dull.
had grown softer.
She barely spoke.
Smaller.
When her
like someone
friend
trying not to be
Amarachi
noticed in
asked
her own
what was
home.
wrong.
She
Obila
lied
was furious
and said she had
when he
malaria.
found out the pregnancy
But the truth
was a girl.
she missed him.
All this stress
every
for
time she
female
fetched
Hakeem,
water.
He muttered.
She hoped to see
throwing
that
the scan
black
result
SUV
on the floor.
pull up.
Amara
Every time
wept that
someone
night,
knocked at the gate,
clutching her belly,
her heart
and whispering
leapt with hope.
prayers. But he
She
didn't
no
come,
longer spoke
and
to
she
her
didn't
father.
call. After
She
all,
didn't even know
it
what
was
to
his
say
pride that
if she
sold
did.
her into this
Was she
misery.
being too harsh?
She tried to talk to
Was
her
she
mother
wrong
once,
to feel
but the
betrayed?
woman only
Or
cried.
was she right to
We didn't
demand
know,
honesty
Amara,
from someone she
please
had
manage.
trusted so purely?
It's your cross now.
She scrolled through
Manage.
her phone often.
That was the
looking
word
at
they
their
all
few
used,
photos together,
as if she was a
him
worn-out
holding
chair
roasted
to be
plantain,
patched,
her
not a
giggling
human
with
being.
flour on her
Amara
cheek.
stopped
Then she
hoping for
quickly
rescue.
delete them
The
and
only
cry
light in
herself
her
to
life
sleep
was the gentle flutter of the baby.
Continued her
manipulation.
She named her
She
in her
posted
heart.
pictures of herself at high-end restaurants.
God is with me.
Tagging Damien's name
businesses
in subtle
began
ways
to crumble.
to make it seem
The
like they were
loans
back
he took
together. To keep
She
up
even paid a
appearances were
blogger
due.
to write a fake
Creditors
gossip piece.
began
Damien
visiting the
Okonkwo
house,
spotted with
Amara
former
watched
fiancé
as the
again.
man who once
Love
strutted like a
rekindled.
king now
The article
yelled into
spread
phones,
quickly,
and
especially
smashed
among
glasses
those
frustration.
who knew Ngozi.
His temper
Her
worsened.
friend showed it to
He
her.
blamed her.
And Ngozi's
Since
heart
you
broke
entered my life,
all over
everything
again.
went down.
She didn't
He
even
shouted,
have the
throwing
strength
plates.
to be angry.
When she pleaded
just
with him
felt
not to
defeated.
hit her in
She
front
turned
of the
off her
house girl,
phone for
he
2
dragged
days.
her by the wrist
She stopped
into their
cooking
room and
stopped
locked the
praying.
door.
Each time he beat her,
In her
she'd
mind,
whisper
it was
apologies.
over. She didn't
Damien
know.
had
Just
gone
to
back
survive.
to the woman.
She
who
learned to
matched his
smile
world.
in public
the rich
and scream
gowns,
into her pillow
not
at
the
night.
maiden wrappers.
By the time she
And
gave
once
birth,
again,
Obinna
life had
didn't
proven
even
what
show
she
up
feared
at
the
the
most.
hospital. That
She
people
was
like her
alone,
weren't meant to be
bleeding,
loved
shaking,
by men like
with
him.
no flowers,
Ngozi didn't
no
sleep
husband,
that night.
no congratulations.
Amara's words
Just
kept
the soft
echoing
cries
in her
of
head
baby Chisholm,
like thunder.
the only
during
thing she
Harmattan.
had left to hold
He's
on
a
to in a
billionaire
world
that
just
kept letting her
using
go.
you.
Ask him about his
News
companies.
reached the village
that
everything
Amara's
she thought
marriage
she knew
was
about
not
Damien
what it appeared to
suddenly
be.
began
The
to
gifts
feel
had
like a
stopped.
lie.
The cars
Why
no
hadn't he
longer
ever
came
told her
for
where he
family
lived?
functions.
Why did he
Chief
come in
Okafor
casual
began
clothes,
to sense something
never
was wrong,
speaking of his work?
but his pride
Why
was
did
too
he
great
avoid her
to admit
questions
it
about his
publicly.
daily schedule?
His health had already
She had
started
never
declining
cried
because
because
she
of old
respected
age,
his silence,
stress,
but now
and
she
guilt he
felt
refused
foolish.
to name.
She sat
One fateful
outside
day,
the compound.
Chief Okafor
wrapped in her
made an
faded wrapper,
unannounced visit to
staring
Lagos.
into the night.
He had heard
What if she
whispers
had
that
been
Obinna
cooking
was in
for a
trouble
man
with creditors,
who only came
that he
for
had
a
mortgaged
mortgaged
part of his family land.
What if,
to fund
like
a
Madame
failed
Chignon
import deal?
accused,
He didn't
she
tell
was
his
nothing
wife
more than
or
a
the
distraction.
villagers. He simply
pain
packed
didn't
a
come
bag
from money
and showed
it
up
came from
at
trust.
Obinna's residence.
She had started
But what
opening
he
her
saw
heart
broke
to
him.
She
She
had
found
started
his daughter
imagining
his
things
Samara.
she had no
outside
business
the gate,
imagining.
kneeling.
Her
Now
face
all of
bruised,
it felt like
her
a
wrapper
house of
torn,
cards built
while
on
Obinna
shifting sand.
stood above her shouting,
You
"Meanwhile,
useless woman,
Amara
you
smiled
brought
to
bad
herself
luck into
in
my
her
life."
koi flat.
Obinna's
Sipping
voice
wine
boomed
like a woman
when
who had
Chief
just scored a
Okafor
victory.
rushed forward
She
in
knew
shock.
how Damien
Obinna
worked.
didn't flinch.
He hated being
He
questioned.
sneered.
He hated
This is
being
the
pushed.
wife you gave
She was
me
betting
in the
on
eye.
one thing,
Come
that
and
when
carry
Ngozi
her.
confronted him,
She's spoiling
he would
everything,
withdraw
and shut
Amara
down emotionally.
didn't lift her face,
just like he had done
she
with
couldn't.
her when things
Her
began
eyes
to
were
sour.
swollen.
She
Her
didn't need
lips cut.
Damien to
She
love
tried
her
to
anymore,
speak,
but all
she
it came
just
out
didn't
was a
want him
whisper.
to move on
Papa,
without
Chief
her.
Okafor
Especially
staggered back,
not with
holding
someone
his
like
chest.
Ngozi.
His
Her
breath
pride
caught.
couldn't handle
He had
it.
expected
So
maybe stress,
Amara
maybe some
doubled
hardship,
down.
but
She
not
had kept
this.
some old
Not his
private
daughter
photos.
treated like a dog.
Once she took
like
a gutter
Damien,
water,
asleep beside
Obinna,
her, clearly
others
drunk
from when they
turned
traveled
to him.
to Ghana
You better
and
go
Paris.
back to that your
She
village.
sent them anonymously
You don't
to
belong
Ngozi's
here.
small
Your
techno
daughter
phone
is finished.
via WhatsApp.
Those words.
He's not
Your
who you
daughter
think
is
he
finished.
is. Were the
Ask
last
him
thing
about
Chief
Okafor
Okafor
heard before his
Ask
knees
him
buckled.
about the private
He
jet.
collapsed,
And
gasping
then
for
she
air.
blocked the number.
Neighbors screamed.
It wasn't about winning
Amara
Damien
forgot
back.
her pain.
It was
and
about
rushed to her
making
father,
Ngozi
crying
feel
out for help.
worthless.
A
Ngozi
gate man
stared at
helped
the
lift him
messages,
into a kiki,
the images,
and they rushed him
the
to the
names of
hospital.
companies
That
she had
night,
never heard of.
Chief Okafor
Suddenly,
suffered a
everything
massive
clicked.
stroke.
The
One that would
casualness,
paralyze
the
half his
SUV,
body,
and
the way
steal
some
his voice.
strangers looked at
The
him
man who
with
once
respect
barked
when they
orders
walked
now lay
past.
still.
Even the way
His mouth
he always
drooping
had
on one
cash
side.
or bought
His
ingredients
eyes
without
heavy
flinching.
with the weight of
He
regret.
was rich, very rich.
Amara sat
and he had
beside
never
him,
told her.
weeping.
She didn't
This
know
is
whether
not
to be
what I wanted,
angry,
she whispered.
ashamed,
You
or
sold me
heartbroken.
to a monster,
Was she
Papa.
just another
But Chief
story to him?
Okafor could not
A
reply.
street girl
All he
who
could do
gave
was
him
blink.
nostalgia,
Once, twice.
a charity case
As tears
to help
rolled
soothe
down
his
the one
conscience.
side of his face
She
that
thought
still
about their
moved.
laughter.
Her mother
The way he
arrived
sat
with
days
her
later
while she cooked
and broke
the
into
way he
tears
listened.
at the sight of
But
him.
now,
She
all
pulled
she could
Amara
feel was
aside
betrayal.
and finally
She had been
confessed.
honest with
I
him
beg
from
him.
day one.
I told him not
about
to
her
give you
poverty,
to that man.
her pain,
But he said
her
poverty
dreams,
is louder than
and
love.
he had hidden everything.
Amara nodded
Her
numbly.
chest tightened.
She had no
Her
more
hands
tears left.
trembled.
She
Something
returned home that
inside
night,
her snapped.
found Obinna
She had
drunk
to
again,
confront him,
and locked
She had
herself
to know
in
the
the
truth,
bathroom with
no
Chisholm.
matter how badly
Sitting
it
on the
hurt.
cold tile
It was a
floor,
quiet
she
Sunday
whispered
morning
into
when
her daughter's
Damien showed
ear.
up again.
I'm sorry,
I brought you into this world like this, but I will protect you, intending to ask even if it kills me, to prepare pepper
And with
soup.
that, a new version of Amara was
even a
born.
little excited.
Not the girl
Something
who
he
loved,
rarely felt.
not the woman who
But
hoped,
when he walked
but
into
the
the
mother
compound
who
and
would
called her
endure.
name, back
She
in the
didn't
present,
come out.
after storming
Instead,
out of
she
Amara's
emerged
room
from the back.
Damien
Face
couldn't
pale,
sleep.
lips
His
tight,
mind
and
was
eyes
a battle
heavy
with something he
emotions.
couldn't place.
Anger clawed
She
at him.
didn't smile,
But it wasn't
she
sharp
didn't
and
greet
clean
him anymore.
like she always
It
did.
was heavy. Damien
Confused,
froze, messy.
Something was wrong.
He paced around his
Ngozi,
apartment
is everything
in a coy,
okay?
he asked.
Shirtless.
She
Gripping
stared at
a glass
him
of whiskey
for a long
he hadn't
second
touched.
before
His
stepping
phone
closer.
rang 3 times.
Who are you
His
really,
assistant,
Damien?
a business
Her voice
partner,
was
his mother.
flat. He
What do you
ignored
mean?
all
He
of us,
asked,
confused.
All he could see
She
was
pulled out her
Amara's
phone
face
and
pale
showed
and
him the
broken,
photos Amara
whispering his
had
name
sent.
with the same
You never
voice
told me
she
anything.
once used to tell him
Nothing
she loved him.
about who you
He
are.
sat on
You
his
sit
leather
with me
couch
here like
trying to
someone
bury the
normal.
memory.
But all this
it
time you've
surged
been
forward.
hiding your life.
Obinna.
Why?
Chisholm.
Damien stood
Bread.
stunned.
Rain.
He hadn't expected
Amara.
this.
The
Not
names
today,
tangled
not
in
like
his chest
this.
like barbed wire.
Ngozi, I didn't
Why
hide
hadn't he
anything
asked
to
more?
hurt you.
Why
He
hadn't
began.
he stayed?
But pride
I didn't
was a
want you to
stubborn
treat
poison.
me differently.
At 2 a.m.,
She laughed
Damien
bitterly,
grabbed his car
and it broke
keys
him,
and drove
but you didn't
back
trust
to the
me
slum.
enough to even
The
give me a
apartment was
choice.
dark
She
when he
snapped.
arrived.
Do you know what it's
He
like
knocked.
to think someone sees
No
you
answer.
for who you are?
He knocked again,
only to realize
the door
they were
creaked
seeing you
open slowly.
through a one-way glass.
Amara was still awake,
Damien sighed,
sitting on the
his
edge of
heart
the
heavy.
mattress,
I've
sipping
been
water
hurt before,
from a plastic
he
cup.
confessed.
Her eyes
Used,
lifted slowly
lied
to meet his.
I wanted something
You came
real,
back, she
and you
whispered.
gave me that
Damien
without
stepped
knowing
in
who I was
and shut the door
I
behind
didn't
him.
want to ruin it
For a moment,
but
Ngozi
silence
shook her
stretched
head,
between them,
fighting tears.
not awkward.
You
but
already
deep,
did,
like a wound
I told
exposed.
you everything about me.
Where's Obinna?
Damien, he asked.
I told
his
you how
voice
I
flat.
suffered.
Amara
And you sat
exhaled,
there, eating my
gone.
food, while
Years
pretending
ago,
to be something
after
else.
he lost everything,
I feel small.
he left.
I
don't even
used.
know if he's alive.
I feel like you pitied
Damien
me.
nodded once.
Damien took
then
a step
sat
forward,
across from her.
but she stepped
You
back.
never told me.
There was a long,
You never
painful
explained.
silence between
Amara
them.
blinked
The
back
neighborhood
tears.
was quiet.
I
The
wanted
only
to.
sound being
I
the child's
tried.
bicycle
But you left
clattering
too.
on the cement.
And by the time I could
Damien
speak,
searched her
life
eyes,
had already
hoping
become
to find
survival.
a crack. Something
Then
that
she
said
told him
she
everything,
still trusted
from
him.
a slap
But
on
all
the
he saw
engagement
was a
night
wall.
to Obinna's abuse.
If you don't want to see me
to the
again,
day her
he said
father
softly,
collapsed in the
I'll
street.
understand. Her voice
But please
didn't
believe
break.
me.
It was
I
calm.
never wanted to hurt
The
you.
calm of someone who
Ngozi's
had cried
voice
so
was
much
there were
barely
no
whisper
tears
now.
left to give.
I just need
Damien
space.
listened.
I
His
need to
fists
think.
clenched.
Damien
Rage
nodded
boiled
slowly.
inside him.
He
Not
dropped
her,
the cooler of
but at the
fish at her
people who had
feet
stolen their
and
story,
walked away,
shattered their
without
plans,
another word.
left her to
Each
rot.
step felt
He
heavier than the
stood
last.
abruptly.
Ngozi
You're
stood
not
there,
staying here
eyes
another
glazed,
night,
chest
he said.
burning.
You
The man she
and
thought
your
was
daughter
the most
pack your
sincere
things.
she had ever met
Amara
had been
chuckled
hiding
dryly.
the biggest part
Where
of
are we
herself.
going?
And
Heaven.
now she wasn't sure
Damien
what was
knelt
real
before
anymore.
her.
His
His
words,
voice
his
softer
laughter,
now.
or the
You don't have
connection
to
she
suffer
had believed
anymore.
in so deeply.
Not because
the days
of him.
that followed
Not
the longest
because
of
Damien's
your father.
life. Not
He
even
stayed
because
away
of
from
me.
Surelier, out of
Amara
respect for her
didn't
wishes.
answer.
But
But
every
her
moment
eyes
felt like
the
swollen
slow,
and tired,
suffocating
softened
death.
just
His
enough
mansion
to hold
in
hope.
Banana
From the
Island
corner,
echoed with
Chisholm
silence.
stirred in her sleep
He couldn't
and
eat,
mumbled mummy.
couldn't focus
Damien
on
turned
work.
to look at her.
Every
That
room
child
reminded
that
him
cellar.
of her laughter.
She had unknowingly
The taste of her
reopened
food
a
still
love
lingered
story
in his
faith
mouth,
had tried
but
to
his
bury.
appetite was gone.
And Damien,
His
for the
staff
first time
noticed
in a
the
decade,
shift.
wanted
His
to write a
secretary
different
whispered
ending.
to his driver.
The next morning,
Damien
Damien
smiled
drove
again
Amara
and Chisholm,
but
to
no
a
one knew
private
why.
hospital for
He tried to
urgent
distract
evaluation.
himself. Meetings,
Amara was
gym,
busy,
work
her
dinners,
breathing shallow,
but nothing
and the
filled the
nurses
void.
immediately
He had
put her
opened his
on
heart
oxygen.
slightly for
Damien
the first
filled
time
out
in years,
forms,
and
paid
now
cash
it
up
felt
front,
like it had been
and called a
slammed shut
specialist.
again.
Chisholm
What hurt
sat
the
beside
most
her
wasn't
mother's
just
hospital
that he
bed.
had lost her.
Her tiny
It was the
fingers
knowledge that he
clutching
had done
the
it to
edge of the
himself.
blanket.
By being
When
too
Amara
guarded,
finally fell
too
asleep,
afraid to be
Damien
vulnerable,
stepped out
and
too
called
stuck
one
in
more
his own
person
trauma
to
cheap
let her in
Okafor's
completely.
nurse.
It was
Ngozi,
time
too,
for another
was drowning in
confrontation.
pain. One
She
that had been
returned
to
to
cooking,
years
cleaning,
overdue,
and helping
that
her friend
afternoon
with laundry work.
Damien walked into
But her
her
joy
joy
was gone.
Where the once
Her
mighty
energy
chief
was dull.
Okafor
Now
now barely
lay.
spoke. The room
When her
smelled
friend
of
Amarachi
antiseptic, and
asked
the
what
old
was
man
wrong,
sat by the
she
window
lied
in
and
a
said she had
wheelchair.
malaria.
His face
But
drew
the truth
slightly
was
from a
she
stroke.
missed him.
His
Every
hands
time she
folded
fetched
quietly
water,
in his
she
lap.
hoped to see
his
that
eyes
black
lit up when
SUV
Damien
pull
entered.
up.
Every time
Recognition
someone knocked
flashed
at the
gate.
instantly, her heart
Dee to me,
leapt with hope.
the older man
but he
croaked.
didn't come.
Tears
And she
forming
didn't call.
at the edge of his eyes.
She didn't even know
Damien
what to say
stood in front
if
of him,
she did.
silently.
Was she
for
being
a
too
full
harsh?
minute.
Was
Then
she wrong
Saturday,
to feel
you
betrayed?
remember me? He
Or
asked.
was she right to
Cheap
demand
Okafor
honesty
blinked
from
once,
someone
then
she had
twice.
trusted so
His
purely?
lips trembled.
She scrolled
I
through her
run,
phone often,
he struggled
looking
with
at
his
their few
speech.
photos together.
His nurse
him
stepped
holding
forward.
roasted plantain.
Sometimes he
her
stutters
giggling
with
when he's
flour
emotional
on her cheek, she explained.
Then she'd quickly
Damien
delete
nodded
them
and waited.
cry herself
Eventually,
to sleep.
Amara, meanwhile, gripped the armrest of his wheelchair and forced the words out.
She posted pictures of herself at high-end restaurants,
tagging
Damien's
name
in
jaw
ways
clenched
to make it seem
Then,
like
for the first time,
the old man
wept.
paid a blogger
Not
to write
the
a
weeping
fake
of a
gossip
proud
piece.
man in pain,
Damien
but the weeping
spotted
of a
with
father
former
who had
fiancée
watched his
again.
daughter
Love
brought under the
rekindled.
weight of
The
a mistake
article spread
he
quickly,
made in arrogance.
especially
among
unwanted
those
money.
who knew Ngozi.
I destroy her.
Her friend showed
The
it to her,
words came
and
like
Ngozi's
stabs.
heart broke
Damien
all over again.
swallowed hard.
She didn't even
She's
have the
dying,
strength
he
to
said
be
plainly.
angry.
She
She
just
felt
oxygen.
defeated.
Your
She
only
turned off
daughter
her phone
is
for 2
fighting
days.
for her life.
She
You
stopped
gave
cooking.
her away like a goat.
Stop praying.
And now you sit
Stop
here,
hoping.
too broken to
In
help.
her mind, it was
Chief
over.
Okafor
Damien
dropped
had
his
gone
head.
back to the
He
woman
had no
who
defense.
matched his world.
Only
the
regret.
rich girl in gowns.
Then Damien
not
stood,
the maid in
his
wrappers.
voice quieter
and
now.
once again,
But I won't
life
let her
had
die.
proven what
You
she
couldn't
feared the
protect
most.
her.
that people like her weren't meant to be loved by men like him.
Get him ready
Damien
tomorrow.
became a ghost
He's coming
in
to
his
see
own
her,
empire.
even if we have to
For
carry
weeks,
him.
his driver
As he
would
walked
pick him
away,
up in the morning.
he heard the
dressed
old man
in his
sob
usual
louder.
well-tailored suit,
But there was no
but the glow was
satisfaction
gone.
in it.
His
Only
smiles
sadness.
were mechanical.
Damien
His
stepped out into the
responses were
sun,
brief.
feeling
Even
the
the
weight
staff in his
of
company,
1,000 memories
D-Tech Holdings,
pressing on his
noticed
shoulders.
the shift. In his
Olga
car,
Conde changed.
he gripped the
Someone
steering wheel
whispered
tightly.
during a
He had
strategy
seen
meeting.
two versions
His
of
board
Amara,
members
the girl
assumed
who
it was
believed
due
in
to
him,
market stress,
and the woman who suffered
his personal assistant
because of
tried to
those who
lighten his
didn't.
mood with jokes.
Now, as he
But
looked at the
Damien was
hospital
locked
in the
in.
distance,
He
he
went
made a
through the
silent
motions.
vow.
Meetings,
Whatever
financial
it takes,
briefings,
I will
dinner
fight for her
receptions.
now.
But his
Even if
mind
it's too
was
late.
always in
The sterile
Surreal.
cold scent
In
of
that narrow
antiseptic
corridor,
filled the private
that
ward
firewood kitchen,
as Amara was
that
wheeled
warm
into a
bowl of
secluded
Agbona's soup,
hospital room.
and above
at
all,
Adenuga Memorial
the girl
Hospital,
who had looked at him
one of the most
like he was just a
expensive
man
in Lagos,
not a billionaire.
Damien stood
The
by the
cold
glass
silence
window,
between
arms
them
folded
cut deeper
across
than
his
any
chest.
breakup.
His eyes
It wasn't
never
loud
moving
or
the
angry.
unconscious
It was
woman
haunting,
lying
she
on the
hadn't
white
called.
sheets.
She
Her
hadn't
frailty
replied
was
to
now
any messages.
exaggerated under the
She had
harsh
disappeared.
fluorescent lights,
And in
her
her
sunken
silence,
cheeks.
the
Damien
pale
realized
tint of
just
her
how
once rich
deeply
skin.
she had
The
gotten
slow
into his
rise
heart.
and fall of her chest
He checked
under
her compound
oxygen
twice
support.
from a distance.
Chisholm sat
on
once.
a nearby
He
bench,
saw her carrying
hugging
her
clothes
knees
to the line,
her tiny
looking
face
thinner,
swollen
slower.
from crying.
But
The
he didn't
room
approach.
buzzed with machines.
He didn't want to
beeping
intrude.
softly.
He told
mocking the
himself he was
helplessness
respecting
in Damien's
her space.
chest.
But the
He had
truth
spent
was,
the past
he was
hours
scared.
signing documents,
Scared that
authorizing
she had moved on,
emergency care,
that she truly
transferring
believed he
5
had
million
betrayed her,
Nigerian
that
naira.
maybe
Up front.
she was right.
Money
Maybe
had never been a
he should
problem
have
for him.
told her from
But
the start.
watching Amara
But how do
struggle
you
to
explain
breathe
trauma?
made him feel
How do
like
you
a poor
explain
man
that
after
all
being
over
used
again?
and mocked by
Later that
Amara.
evening,
He
the
simply
head
wanted
physician,
one place in the
Dr.
world
Okon,
where he wasn't
entered the
Damien
room
the billionaire,
holding a thick
where he
brown
was just
folder.
Damien.
His face
the
was
man who
professional,
loved pepper
but
soup
cautious,
and laughing
the
with
way
a girl
doctors
in
look
slippers
when they're about
now
to
that
deliver
space
news
was gone.
no one wants
and
to hear.
nothing could replace
Mr.
it.
Okonkwo,
His
he
mansion
said softly,
felt too large.
"May I have a word?"
His dinners
Damien
too
nodded
tasteless.
and followed
His
him
silence
into the
too
hallway.
loud.
It's
Even
not
his
good,
security
Dr.
guards
Okon
noticed.
began.
She
She
has
has
stage
stage
4
4
kidney
kidney
failure,
one whispered.
alongside
It was
complications
as if the
from
joy had
untreated
drained from his
diabetes
veins
and hypertension.
Ngozi, too,
There's evidence
was
of
drowning
old
in
internal
silence.
injuries,
But hers was
possibly
born
from
from
years of
heartbreak
trauma
and pride.
She's been running on
She
fumes.
missed him terribly.
Mr. Okonkwo
Missed the way
her
he
body
watched her cook.
is shutting
The
down.
way he didn't interrupt
Damien's
when she
throat
vented.
went dry.
The way he
What are her
helped peel
chances?
yam
He asked,
without shame.
his voice hollow.
But she felt used.
Dr. Okon
Even if he
hesitated.
hadn't meant it.
With
She felt
immediate
like a joke.
dialysis,
How
round-the-clock
could she have given
monitoring,
so
and
much of
organ
herself
transplant
to someone
evaluation
who hadn't
maybe
trusted
10%
her enough to
Damien
tell her the
clenched
truth?
his jaw.
And now the
Then
blogs
do
were saying
everything.
he had returned
Try
to Amara.
everything.
That
Money
photo
is not
that
the
lie,
issue.
it was too much.
The doctor
Every
nodded.
time she fetched
We've
water,
already started.
neighbors whispered,
But
prepare
one
for the
even
worst.
said,
Now
Damien
so all
walked
these
back
bags
into the
do.
room
Like a
small
man
money.
walking
Demko
toward a
thinks
funeral
Dem
he
Don
wasn't
become
ready
Adam.
for.
He sat
Ngozi
beside her
cried
and took
into
a
a
frail
wrapper at
hand
night.
into his,
But she
and
refused
stared
to
at the
reach
woman
out.
who once
Her
danced
dignity
barefoot
was
with him
all
in a
she had
village
left.
under the stars.
Her heart might have broken.
This wasn't how it was
but her
supposed to
pride,
end.
that was
She
still
wasn't
intact,
supposed to fade like
even if
this.
it killed her.
Not Amara.
Amara
She
was
had
glowing,
been fire and
or
laughter,
at least pretending
beauty,
to,
and peace.
She moved from
the
spa
only
to
woman
spa,
who had ever
hosting
seen
brunches
beyond his
and
poverty.
staging luxury
And now
photo shoots.
she was lying on a
picture was
bed in a
curated
city
to
that
screen
once
one
mocked
message.
both of them. I'm back in
Slipping through
Damien's
his life.
fingers.
She
Chisholm,
flooded her Instagram
sensing the heaviness
with
in the
throwback
room,
videos, tagging
slid
him
closer,
even
and
posting
whispered,
snippets of
"Is my
voice
money
notes
going to die?"
where his voice
Damien
could barely
blinked
be
back
heard.
tears.
Most of
He
it was
couldn't lie.
fabricated.
He couldn't
But in a
promise.
world of perception,
So he knelt before her
appearance
and
is
said,
everything.
"We are going to fight."
Some blogs
as
picked
hard
up.
as we can.
One headline read.
Then he kissed Amara's
Damien
cold
Okonkwo
hand and
spotted
whispered
again
with his
"Please
ex,
don't leave.
Wedding bell soon?
And it
That
hurt.
night,
Not
long
him.
after the
But
nurses
the people
had
who
dimmed
saw
the
through
lights
it.
and Chisholm
His staff
had fallen
rolled
asleep
their
on the
eyes.
hospital bench.
His younger cousin
Damien
texted him,
found himself
"Olga,
alone
this
in the
vague
small
day,
chapel at the
Lio.
corner of the
You
hospital
gave
grounds.
all her hand
It
by
was
keeping
quiet,
dimly
but
lit
Damien
by a
said
few
nothing.
flickering candles.
He didn't care
and
about
empty,
public image
except for a
anymore.
janitor sleeping
Let her
on a
do
pew near the
whatever.
Damien
Let her play
sat
her
in the
games.
front row.
He didn't
still
owe
in his
anyone
suit.
an
His hands
explanation.
clasped tightly
especially
in front of him.
not her. For years,
But Amara,
he had relied
more than
only
online
on himself.
attention.
Not
She wanted
God,
access,
not fate,
She
not
tried
family.
showing up at
He
his
had clawed
company
his
lobby
way up from
unannounced,
slums
but
to
the receptionist
skyscrapers
had strict
with
instructions
nothing but
not to
will
let her
and
in.
vengeance.
She sent
But
gift
tonight,
baskets
none
to
of
his
his
house.
billions could
They
guarantee
were
him
returned unopened.
the one thing
She
he
now
texted him
desperately
daily.
wanted.
He never
Amara's
replied.
life.
The
He
silence
stared at the
was
large
driving
wooden
her mad.
crucifix
How
above
could a
the
man
altar,
she once
his
controlled
lips trembling.
now? I don't even know
Ignore
how
her
to
completely,
pray,
he muttered.
It burned her ego.
But if you're listening,
she stormed
if you're
into
still
a popular
real,
lounge
please
one
don't
night,
take her.
where she knew
He
his
leaned
associates
forward,
hung out,
resting
and
his
pretended
elbows
they were
on the
still
wooden
in
pew,
talks.
and let the
But the people
silence
closest to
draw him
Damien
deeper.
had already sensed
In
the
that
truth.
quiet,
His
the
heart
weight
was
of
elsewhere.
everything he had
You
bottled
think
up
I'll marry a maid?
came crashing
Someone
down.
asked sarcastically.
She didn't deserve this.
No,
he whispered.
another replied.
She was kind,
But that girl
she
touched him
believed
in a
in
way
me
Amara
when
never
nobody else
could.
did. She
Still,
gave me her heart,
Amara
and I
refused
let
to
her
back
go.
down.
I
She
let
was
them take her
convinced
from
this
me.
was a phase.
Her father,
That once she
wore
wore
him
him
down,
even
he
my
would
own
return.
mother. So she
I
took
should
the
have
next
fought
step,
harder,
deeper and
His
darker.
voice cracked.
She paid
And
someone
now
in
I finally see
Syria
her again,
to dig deeper,
and she's
into
broken
Ngozi's life.
not just physically,
A fake
but
tenant.
everything.
He began
And
to
I
spread
can't fix
rumors
it.
around the compound.
His hands trembled
That fine
as he
man
buried his
dumped her
face
own.
into them.
She did
God,
pretend
please,
say she holy,
I will give
but not
anything.
Olga. She
I
did
don't
follow.
care about the money.
One evening,
Take my
after
companies.
Ngozi returned
Take
from her
everything.
part-time laundry
Just
work,
let her live.
she found
For a
slashed
man
clothes
who had
in
conquered
the compound
boardrooms
and
and
brought governments
someone
to their
had
knees
stepped
on
on
her
her
cooked
cooked
soup.
soup,
This was the
ruining
first
her
time
dinner.
Damien,
Her name
Okonkwo,
was now
truly felt
poisoned
helpless
among neighbors.
Minutes
The
turned
whispers
into hours,
had turned to
At some
mockery.
point, he felt
A
his
shallow
knees.
made,
Someone
forehead
hissed
pressed
under
against
their
the cold
breath.
floor of
She
the chapel.
couldn't breathe.
Tears
It was
soaking
too much.
into the tiles.
That night,
He wept not
she
just
considered
for
packing
Amara,
her bags,
but for
and
everything
going
he
back
had
to the
lost.
village. Everything
Maybe
he had
this
become.
Lagos life
The proud
wasn't
boy
meant
who
for her.
once loved
Maybe
under
her
the mango
dreams
tree
were foolish.
was now a
But just
billionaire
as she
begging
sat
in
on
a
her
chapel,
bed,
bargaining with
chest,
heaven, and trying
he
not to
stayed
cry.
there long into
Something
the night,
worse was
not
already on
moving,
its way,
not speaking,
something more
just breathing
dangerous
the
than
silence.
whispers.
Letting
It
the
happened
pain
on a
wash
Thursday
over him
evening.
like baptism.
Ngozi
And in
had
that
just
moment,
returned from
something
running
inside
errands.
him cracked
She
open.
carried a small
Not
bag of
weakness,
rice,
not
and
shame,
a tin of
but
tomatoes.
grace.
As she
A
turned the
willingness
corner
to
into
let
her
go of
compound,
blame,
she
to
felt
forgive
something
the past,
behind her, to become
too
the kind of
fast,
man Amara
too sudden.
once believed
A sharp
he could
hand
be.
pulled her
And
back.
somewhere in the distant
Before she
corridors
could
of the
scream,
hospital, another
the
hand
beeping
covered her
of a
mouth.
heart monitor
She
slowed,
struggled,
but did not
twisting
stop.
and kicking.
The following
The
days
men were
were a
rough,
blur of machines,
smelling of sweat
wires,
and alcohol,
and waiting.
Now she be the
Amara's
girl,
body
one
was
whispered,
kept alive
yes,
by tubes and drugs.
Teach him small
but her
lessons,
consciousness
make she no
flickered
day
like a
format
candle
again.
about to go out.
Ngozi's
Damien's
heart stopped.
converted an entire
It wasn't a
wing
robbery
of the hospital
It was a
into
setup.
her private recovery
One man
unit.
raised his
He
belt
hired
and
specialists
lashed it
from
across
South
her back.
Africa
She
and brought
gasped
in
in pain.
round-the-clock
They
consultants.
shoved her behind the
bills
block skyrocketed into tens
out
of
of
millions.
sight.
But
She
he
was
didn't
being
flinch.
beaten.
He
Her
moved
slippers
Chisholm
flew
into
off.
a private
Her
suite
rice
down the hall
scattered.
and
She
brought in a
screamed,
tutor to
but
keep
her
her
voice
occupied.
was drowned
by
by
the
the
noise
noise
of
of
barely
nearby
focused
generators.
Every morning,
The men
she
hit,
walked to her
mopped,
mother's
and
bed,
warned,
whispered,
"Stay
"I love
away
you,"
from wet
and
no
kissed her
concern you.
forehead.
Billionaire,
Then she sat in the corner
Mary
with her
May.
teddy bear
and
just
waited.
when they were about
Damien
to leave
visited
her
Amara
bruised and
before
bleeding, and after
a car
every meeting,
screeched into the
sometimes
street.
during Zoom
It was
calls with
Damien.
board members.
He had just
His
returned from a
laptop
business
open
dinner when his
beside
driver,
her, while
who
he
had
held her
ties in
hand with the
Syria,
other.
told
"You're not
him
allowed to
about
leave,"
the recent
he
rumors.
whispered constantly.
Damien
had
not
driven
yet.
straight there,
Not like this.
instincts burning.
But hope,
and what
though
he saw
powerful,
shattered
is
him.
a slow medicine.
Ngozi curled on
Some
the ground.
days,
Amara's
Amara's
vitals
forehead
improved
the
slightly.
edge of her wrapper
Her
torn,
heart rate
her
normalized.
shopping bag
her
spilled.
oxygen levels rose.
Without thinking,
The doctors
jumped
would
out of the
nod
car,
cautiously,
his fists
call it
flying.
stabilization.
One attacker ran,
And just when
but
Damien
the other got
began
a punch,
to breathe,
so hard
a
his
new
tooth came
complication
loose.
would arise.
Damien
her
was
kidneys
shaking
would
with
struggle.
rage.
Her temperature
His guard
would spike.
arrived moments
her
later,
body
called
would
the
seize
police
in the night,
and rushed
nurses
to help
rushed
Ngozi up.
in multiple
She was
times
barely conscious.
with emergency kits.
Her lips quivered
Damien
as she whispered.
began sleeping
Damien,
in a recliner.
He grabbed her
beside
gently.
her bed.
"I'm here."
His mother called
"You're safe
several
now."
times.
"I'm
But he
so
refused
sorry.
to speak to her.
I should have
What
protected
could
you."
she say now?
He lifted her
that
into
she
his
was
car,
right, ignoring
Amara
the
was a
watching
gold
neighbors.
digger.
Their
He didn't
shame
need her
written
judgment.
all over their faces.
He needed Amara
in
to
the
open her
backseat,
eyes, to
Damien
whisper his
held
name,
her hand
to
all the
squeeze
way
his
to the
hand
hospital.
like she used to
Tears
in the dark
streamed
when
down
they
his
watched
face.
stars together.
Tears he hadn't
But she
cried in
didn't.
years.
Every evening,
He was
as the
furious
sun sank behind
at
the
himself,
skyline of Lagos,
at Amara,
Damien
at
would
the
sit
society
beside her,
that could see
watching
a rich
the
man
orange
with a
light
poor girl
slide
and
across
call
her
it a
sleeping
scandal.
face.
He looked
He
down
often
and
told
told
her
her
stories
stories
about the
bruised
time
but
he
still
got locked
soft.
out of his apartment
"I'm not
and
leaving
slept
this
in a
time,"
bus stop,
he said.
about the first
More to
time
himself
he
than
closed
her.
a billionaire
She looked up
deal
at him
through
about
swollen
Chisholm
eyes,
and how
for
stubborn
the
brave
first time
she
in
was.
weeks.
He
She
told
didn't
her
feel
everything.
alone.
And
Each
despite
time
the
he
pain,
ended with the same
despite
plea,
the fear,
"Come back to me,
despite the
Amara."
brokenness, she believed
Just
him.
give me one
the
more day
hospital
with you.
room was quiet.
I'll make it count.
Lit only by the
But days
dim
passed,
orange glow
then
of
a
the
week,
bedside lamp.
then 10.
Ngozi lay
And
on the
still
bed,
she did not
her head
wake.
bandaged.
The doctors
One
called
arm
it a
strapped with a
prolonged
drip.
coma-like
Her swollen
state.
lips trembled
Damien
as she
called her
turned to the
war,
man who
one
sat
he
by her
refused to
bedside.
lose. bruise. His eyes,
even if
red
hope from crying,
was bleeding slowly
his hands
from his
refusing
hands.
to let
It
go
happened
of hers.
on a rainy morning.
Damien hadn't
quiet
moved
and
since they brought her
uneventful.
in,
Just like
not
the day
when the
Damien
doctor
first saw
stitched
Chisholm
her
in the
wound.
street.
Not
The
when the
city
nurse
soaked,
changed her
thunder
clothes.
muttering lazily
Not
in the
even when her
distance.
friend
As the
Amarachi
hospital floor
showed up,
glowed
weeping
under emergency
and tried
lights.
to thank him.
Damien
want
had fallen
thanks.
asleep
He
in the
wanted
recliner
justice.
again.
He
His
wanted
hand
to rewind
resting
time
on Amara's
and
wrist.
protect her better.
He hadn't left her
This shouldn't have
side in
happened
2
to you,
days,
he said,
even refusing
his
meetings
voice
that his
cracking.
board said
I left
were
you
urgent.
alone.
Thinking
To him,
space
nothing
was what
could
you
be
needed.
more urgent
But I should
than
have
the life
known people would
lying
come
breathless
after you
beside him.
because of me.
As a nurse,
I should have known
to check
Amara
vitals.
wouldn't stop.
She paused
Ngozi
suddenly.
looked at him
The
silently.
beeping on the machine
Her trust was
changed,
bruised, just like her
slightly,
body.
but
in that
noticeably.
moment, seeing
Her
his
eyes
remorse,
widened.
hearing the pain in his
"Doctor,"
voice,
she called,
a tiny
rushing
crack
to the hallway.
formed in her
Damien
emotional
stirred,
walls.
confused.
Later that evening,
He turned to Amara.
Damien sat
only
by her
to see her
bedside
eyelids
and
flutter
opened up in full
once,
for the first
twice.
time. like a dream trying to remember itself. How Amara had once been his world. Amara, how he loved her blindly until she leaked confidential company files. The room quickly filled with doctors in his nurses, and he confronted her. They checked her vitals. You're just a wallet with legs. Responsiveness. He told Ngozi how that began sobbing quietly as she whispered that he built a wall between his well and his heart. Damien stood behind a facade of control. He watched Amara's lips whispered, "I saw something escaping. Something I hadn't seen in years." Her chest rose. You didn't care with more stability. Who I was. It wasn't much. You didn't want not a miracle for me, but it just gave. For the first time in 2 weeks, then added, "The fog was lifting." When the machine reminded me that I could feel and the head doctor gave a cautious nod, I didn't know how to handle it. Damien, so I ran forward. I leaned close. I stayed brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Because I told you you're not allowed to leave. He murmured, for the first time since the attack. Her lips rolled down, barely audible. Not from pain to hear. From understanding, she breathed. Just that one word. She turned slowly, but her voice was soft to shatter him. He turned. So everything Amara said all streaming down his cheeks. The messages. Call her. He told the nurse. Took out his phone. Tell Chisholm her mother is coming back. Screenshots of messages within Amara minutes had sent him that he never replied to in her pink nightgown, proving she paid clutching at teddy bear Damien had bought her surveillance footage showing her outside his office lobby. Her eyes waiting like a ghost full of cautious hope. She wanted to ruin what I had with you, climbing onto the bed because she knew she could never be what you are real. Amara's eyes opened slightly, her heart enough to see her daughter's face. She had spent weeks blaming herself. Then, thinking she was what little strength she had, a man, she lifted a trembling hand and rested gently as he sat on Chisholm's head, raw and broken. That soft touch, choosing to confess as a whisper, defend, was enough. She saw not a billionaire with emotion, but a man. Nurses, a man who had been hurt, stepped back. A man, his hands on his waist, fighting back, and another wave of tears. A man, the woman they all thought would die after Ngozi was discharged from the hospital, was choosing to stay. Damien didn't send his driver or security team to take her favor. Slowly, himself, steadily, he helped her miraculously, helped her down the stairs. Amara's eyes remained open longer, blinking more frequently. Recognizing silence, her voice was still too weak to carry sentences. When they arrived at her compound, but she whispered words. The same people who once mocked her now stood quietly, watching most telling as she alighted from the Billionaire's. Doctors called it with a miraculous turn on her cheek, especially and dignity after such prolonged trauma. No one spoke. They switched her to lighter sedation. Others began monitoring her recovery more closely. Didn't care. And started opened her door, helped her out like a gentleman, back and physical strength all the way to her door. Damien remained at her side like a guardian. He stopped her, sleeping in his recliner. I know I have no right to ask, he said, attending Zoom calls. Let me earn your trust again. Chisholm spent most of her time on the floor by her mother's bed. The man reading storybooks aloud while roasting corn, sometimes mispronouncing big words, just to hear her mother's smile, soft chuckle. Ngozi didn't reply immediately. Fragile. She looked at him, really became the heartbeat. The same man who once looked so unreachable. Amara stood in front of her like a child asking for mercy. What day is it? About all the pain, asked one evening. The betrayal. Her voice barely audible, but clearer than the bruises on her back. Damien smiled, and yet she also holding her hand about gently. The soup they cooked together. Day 20. The day you've been fighting for almost 3 weeks. The way he had fought those her men like his life depended on it. 3 weeks. She took a deep breath. She echoed. Trust is like fire, and I was here. Finally said, every day. Once it burns, she stared at him time to for a long moment. Damien smiled softly. He looked away, then nodding slowly. One stick at a time. I couldn't leave you again, even if it takes forever. I did that once. Ngozi never looked at him. Her eyes misty, with tears, but clear, and her throat no tightened. Secrets, she asked. I thought I'd die alone. No secrets, he promised. Gently no kissed more her hand. If you're never going to be alone again, Amara. She laughed through tears. For the first time since she collapsed in that one-room apartment, beginning. Amara let herself push further. That she didn't kiss her, or that someone still saw her as more than a burden. Turned and physical therapy began slowly. Ngozi sat outside her room, staring at the sky. Nurses, her body helped her sit up, but her heart felt lighter. Time. She remembered how he regained her into the hospital. And how each time she turned her head and saw Chisholm's bright face nearby, beside her bed. Her will to she live had never been defended like Damien that hired a live-in caregiver, a nutritionist, love, and it wasn't about perfection for trauma counseling. Maybe it was about he didn't ask for thanks to fix what was broken, closure, and maybe he simply just wanted her to heal. Damien was more than walk again, smile again. Maybe he was the man she had been praying for all along. The love between them was not in layers of pain, but it was unmistakable in every look. She whispered every wordless gesture. If he truly means it, in the nights when her nightmares woke her screaming. Somewhere across he held her hand until her sat on his balcony. In the mornings when she
moon,
cried during
whispering
physical therapy,
the same
he
prayer
stood
too.
beside her.
Damien
Whispering,
started coming back.
"You're stronger than all
Not
of them.
every day,
then everything,
and not with a car full
and
of
with
gifts
each passing
or
day,
flashy gestures.
the woman they all
came
thought had
humbly,
been destroyed
with tomatoes,
slowly
onions,
began to
fresh
come back to
catfish.
life.
Sometimes
3
just a
weeks
bottle
later,
of malt.
after much
He would sit
hesitation
outside
and
on the
advice from
bench
the medical
and
team,
peel vegetables.
Damien made
while
a bold
Ngozi
decision,
cooked.
never
He
forcing
moved Amara
conversation.
and Chisholm
He let
into
her
his
take
mansion
the lead.
in Banana
Their
Island.
silence,
The
was
doctors
now
had
sacred.
agreed she was stable
Slowly,
enough to leave
Ngozi
the
began
hospital,
to smile
but
again.
her recovery
Then
would
laugh.
still take
Then
months.
tease.
Damien,
She called
didn't
him
want her
onion
returning
cutter of
to
the
a
year.
slum.
When he
or
cried
even a
over
rented
one
apartment.
particularly
"You'll
spicy
stay with
batch,
me,"
he said
He called
firmly.
her Madam
"It's
Firewood."
not charity.
When she
It's
scolded
your
him
home too
for
now."
oversalting her
Amara
stew.
resisted at
It wasn't
first.
grand.
Guilt and
It wasn't
pride
fast,
swirling in her
but
chest.
it was real.
But one look
One
at
day,
Chisholm,
she looked
already
at him
laughing
mid-laughter
at the marble
and
floors
realized the
and
pain
glass
no longer
staircase
stung as much.
melted her
He had
resistance.
shown up not with
The mansion
promises,
was massive,
but
6
presence.
bedrooms,
a
not
private
with sweet
pool,
words,
a home gym,
but with action,
and a glass-encased
and in
piano
doing so,
room
overlooking
he had started
water.
melting the walls.
Amara felt
around
like
her
an
heart.
imposter in that space.
Amarachi,
But
her
Damien
roommate,
made
watched
sure
it
to
all
soften the
unfold
transition.
with a smile.
"You're not a visitor
Ngozi,"
here, Amara,"
she said one evening.
he told her,
"If
as
this
he
man
showed her
ever hurts
to
you
a
again,
sunlit bedroom
I will
on the
personally
second
drag
floor.
his billionaire
You're
self
someone I
to a
failed
village
once,
square
and
and
won't
beat him
do
with
it again."
slippers.
They
Life
both
in the
laughed.
mansion started
Ngozi
slowly,
wasn't the same
healing
girl
first,
who once
then
doubted her
adjusting.
worth.
She had
Damien
grown,
brought
not
in a
just
female
emotionally,
trauma counselor
but
for Amara.
spiritually.
Chisholm
She had
was
learned
enrolled
that
in a
love
prestigious
was not
private
just
school
about
nearby,
comfort
with
or
her own
gifts.
personal driver.
It was about showing
Amara's
up,
meals were
about
prepared
choosing
by an
someone
in-house
even
chef,
when they're
and
broken.
a nurse checked
She
her
didn't
vitals
pretend to
every
past,
morning
didn't
and night.
hurt. She
was
didn't erase
overwhelmed,
the pain,
often
but
staring
she
out of her
allowed
balcony
healing
at night
to take root.
wondering how the
One
same
Sunday
guy who
afternoon,
let her suffer
while
for
they
years
sat by the corner
now
eating
placed her
roasted
in
yam,
silk sheets
Damien
and silent
turned to her
halls
and said,
"Damien,
I've been
didn't
thinking."
force conversation.
Ngozi looked
He
up.
simply
About
existed
what?
near her, giving
He
her
took
time,
her hand gently.
giving her peace.
About us.
They talked more
About
now
building something
about the
bigger
past
than pepper
about the
soup
baby
and
they
charcoal.
once dreamed of.
She
about
raised
the boy
her
she
brow,
once believed
pretending
in,
to be
and the man he had
unimpressed.
now become.
Are you
Their
asking to
wounds
build the
didn't
buka
disappear
together?
overnight,
She teased.
but there was
He
laughter
laughed,
again,
then nodded.
cautious,
Yes,
gentle,
but
healing.
I also want to build
One
a
evening,
future.
Amara
With you.
stood in the hallway,
Ngozi
watching
stared at
Damien
him,
help
not
Chisholm
with fear,
with homework
not
on the
with
dining
doubt,
table,
but with a
he was
heart
patient,
full of questions,
guiding
and
her
the
through
tiniest
multiplication
flicker
of hope.
Like a man
"I'm
who
not
had
a
taught
socialite,"
himself
she
everything
said, the hard
I
way.
don't wear heels.
Something about that
I don't
moment,
speak big
the
grammar.
image of the two
My
most
nails
important
are always
people
cracked
in her
from
life
washing.
together.
Damien
Pierced her
smiled.
heart.
And I've
blinked
never
back
met anyone
tears,
more beautiful.
and for the first time,
a tear
she didn't
slipped
feel
down
like
her
a victim.
cheek. Not from
She felt
pain,
like someone
but
who
from
had
disbelief.
survived the fire
After all
and
the
still
mockery,
had something
betrayal,
beautiful
and
left to
bruises.
live for.
Here she was
walked
being
into the
chosen,
room,
quietly,
slowly,
sat beside
gently,
Chisholm,
not
and
as
picked
a
up a
project,
pencil.
but
Let
as
me
a
try,
partner.
she said
She
with
nodded,
a soft smile.
not saying yes,
Damien
not
looked
saying
up
no,
and met her eyes,
just letting the moment
no
breathe.
words were exchanged.
And in that silence,
but in that
love
silent moment of
rekindled,
shared
not in a
homework
mansion,
and healing
not
hearts,
with a ring,
something unspoken
but over
was
roasted
rebuilt,
yam and
not just their
laughter
trust,
beneath the evening
but the
sky.
beginning of home.
Amara's
It was a Sunday
desperation
afternoon when
had
Damien
turned into
finally made the
obsession.
decision to confront
Watching
the ghost
Damien
that had
rebuild
silently
himself without her,
fueled many of his
watching him
choices.
find
His
joy
mother,
again with
Madame
a girl
Clara
who couldn't even
Okonkwo,
afford good
a proud
perfume,
businesswoman
drove her
in her
mad.
late 60s.
She kept
who
planting
had never
stories
hidden
online,
her disdain
sending
for
gossip
Amara.
blog tips
When he
with
called
fake
her and
sightings.
asked her to
Even
come to the
tried to
house
stage a
for a
scene
conversation
at a charity gala
she
he
assumed
sponsored.
it was business
But the
related.
damage was
She
no longer
arrived
to
in
Damien.
flowing lace,
It was to
gold
her own
jewelry,
reputation.
and an entourage
People began
that left their
to
shoes
notice
at
the
the
pattern.
door.
Industry
But when she walked into the
insiders
mansion's
whispered,
sitting
"She's trying
room
too hard."
and saw Amara seated
One
with
anonymous
Chisholm on her
staffer
lap,
leaked a voice
both
note
of them calm,
where Amara
clean,
was caught
alive.
screaming.
She froze.
"He can't choose a maid
What
over
is she
me."
doing here?
That voice
Clara
note
hissed.
went viral.
Damien's social media
expression
erupted,
unreadable.
People laughed,
She lives
insulted,
here,
and mocked
and
her.
that's her daughter.
So even
Clara's
with all your
face
makeup and
twisted in
connections,
disbelief,
Na may beat
you brought her
someone
into your
commented.
house.
Amara's
After all
brand
these
partnerships
years,
started
the same
pulling
woman
out.
who left
Her
you for
luxury
money.
endorsements
Damien
dropped her.
didn't raise his
invitations
voice.
to
He
elite
simply
events
said, "Stop
she
coming."
never left me.
The same
She
fake
was
smile
forced,
she once used
and
to
you helped
manipulate
me
now
hate
faded
the
as
wrong
doors
person.
began to close.
The silence that
Behind the
followed
scenes
was deep
Damien
and
took legal
unforgiving.
action.
Clara
Clara looked at Amara again. He sued her for the first time. Slander, she noticed the weight and harassment, the fragile using wrists, hard evidence, the faint scars, the Photoshop visible on her skin, the fake blog and she paid. The little girl who looked nothing like Obina. She tried to beg him privately, and the heart didn't respond for someone her age. This time, there was no space for mercy. Clara, this wasn't about love. Voice barely. It was about dignity. Damien nodded. The court case was fast, abuse, and decisive. Poverty, illness. She was ordered to pay and damages, she did it all alone and issue because of what we believed. And though Clara sat on live Instagram, overwhelmed, pretending to be the victim, I was wrong. Everyone saw she said. And she her voice tried to destroy a woman. I judged her nothing by her silence, and in the process, I thought she destroyed wealth over you. Damien's final word to her was through a letter.
She simply took Chisholm's hand
me
and
who
stood
not
to
to
leave
leave
the room.
And she
But
taught
before
me
she did,
who I am
she turned
when I'm not
and said
pretending.
softly,
Those
"You
words
hated
broke
me
her for something
She
I
left
never
Lagos
did.
a few
I
weeks
won't
later,
hold it against
disgraced
you,
and
but I won't
forgotten.
let you near my
Meanwhile,
daughter until I see it in your
Ngozi
actions.
didn't celebrate her
It wasn't
downfall.
revenge. She didn't
It
laugh
wasn't
or
cruelty.
gloat. It was
She simply
boundaries,
thanked God.
and Clara
Because
understood
the truth
that.
had finally
Later that
spoken
night,
louder than
Damien
rumors.
walked into Amara's
Neighbors
room
who once
and found
mocked
her
her
staring
now
at the
greeted
night
her with
sky
respect.
through the window. The woman
He
who
leaned
used
on
on
the
the doorway
made way day
she'll come
for a
around
man,
him, he said,
was now seen
Amara nodded.
as someone with
I
quiet
know,
grace
but this
and
time,
powerful dignity.
I'm not the one
She didn't
begging
throw
for
shade
space
online
in someone's
or
life.
announce her victory.
Damien walked
She kept
closer
sweeping
and
her
took her
corridor,
hand gently.
kept cooking
You're
with
not the
love,
girl from the
and
village
kept choosing
anymore,
peace.
he whispered.
Amarachi,
And I'm
her
not the
roommate,
boy
joked
trying
one
to
day,
prove himself.
"Your silence
But somehow
finished that girl
we
past
found
any
each other
slack."
again.
Ngozi
She turned to
smiled.
him,
She
her
had
voice
learned
low.
that real power
What do we
was
do
not
now?
in shouting.
He smiled
but in
faintly.
rising,
Silently,
we live,
consistently,
we heal,
and with
we
class.
raise Chisholm.
And as she looked
And maybe
around
one
her
day
small
we
room,
talk about
she
rings
realized
and forever
something
again.
profound.
She
She had
lacked
lost
softly,
nothing
not the
in
loud,
choosing
carefree
truth.
laugh of her
She had
youth,
only
but the
gained
quiet,
clarity,
contented
healing,
chuckle
and
of a
slowly,
woman who
a
had
new
walked
kind of
through
love
hell
that
and
no
still
one could ever
found
fake
warmth
in
or
her heart.
steal again.
In that laugh, Damien
It was
knew
a quiet evening.
he had not just
the
saved
kind
a
of
woman.
day where
He had
Lagos
rebuilt a
sky
home.
painted itself
A year
with
later,
soft gold and
Lagos
gentle breeze
welcomed its
whispered
rainy
like
season
old
again.
friends.
But this
Ngozi
time,
had just
it didn't bring
finished cooking
sorrow.
okra
It
soup
brought healing.
with pound yam.
Damien,
her
Amara,
hands still
and
dusted
Chisholm
with flour
stood in the
when
same
she heard a
street where it all
soft knock
began.
at the door.
The very
She
corner
opened it
where
to see
Damien's
Damien,
convoy had once
dressed
stopped
in a
to
plain
help a
navy
bread
blue
seller
shirt
under the storm.
and jeans.
The
No
skies
guards,
darkened
no
gently
fancy
as
car
drops
visible.
began to fall.
Just him,
but no one
holding
rushed.
a small white
Chisholm
box.
wore a yellow
Her heart
raincoat.
skipped.
Now attending
"You came,"
the best
she
school
whispered.
in Lagos.
He smiled.
And thriving
"I
beyond
always
anyone's
will."
imagination.
He stepped in
Her eyes
and looked
sparkled
around
as she reached
Same
for Damien's
room.
hand.
Same
This is where
familiar
you saw
scent
me, right?
of seasoning
She asked
and
with pride.
peace.
Damien
Then he
nodded.
walked to the small
Right
table,
here,
cleared a
you
spot,
changed
and
everything.
knelt down.
Amara
Not with
stood
cameras
beside
or
them
roses,
in a soft
but with
encore gown,
sincerity
healed
etched on
and
his
glowing.
face.
Not from
"Ngozi,"
luxury,
he said,
but from love.
voice low, steady.
She held an umbrella
"You have shown
above
me a
them,
world,
but the
I
wind
forgot
kept
existed.
blowing it sideways.
One where food heals
Eventually,
wounds.
she
Where
gave
laughter
up
doesn't
and let
need
the rain
Wi-Fi.
kiss her skin.
Where love is
Let
not
it fall,
bought,
she
but
whispered.
earned. I'm not
He
afraid of
opened
the
the
rain
box.
anymore." Inside was a simple
They
gold
walked
ring,
quietly,
not extravagant,
the three
not
of them,
flashy,
letting the
just
water
pure.
wash over their
I don't want a
laughter,
wedding in
their
Dubai.
silences,
I don't
their
want
memories.
celebrity
People
photographers
around them barely
I
noticed.
just want this.
To
You,
outsiders,
here,
they were just
in
a
your
wealthy
wrapper,
man
with
a
your
graceful
fire
woman,
pots,
and a
with your
joyful
stubborn
child
pride
walking
and
in
your
the rain.
beautiful heart.
But to them,
Ngozi
it
stared
was
at the
resurrection.
ring,
Then at it,
that street,
her breath
once
caught
filled
in her
with hunger,
chest. Now
she didn't
carried
cry.
hope.
That
Not this
city,
time.
once
Her
haunted
tears
by
had
betrayal,
all been spent.
now echoed
Now she
with
simply
second
smiled.
chances.
A full
As they
healing,
passed the
radiant
buka where
smile.
Damien once
She
bought
knelt
Chisholm
beside
food,
him,
touched
the
his
owner
cheek,
rushed
and
out in
whispered,
excitement.
"Yes,
Daddy
no
bread
shouting,
seller.
no
Mama
fireworks,
rain woman," she
just
shouted
two
playfully.
hearts choosing each
They
other
all
in the
laughed.
most unromantic
Damien
place,
even posed
in the
for a
most
selfie.
beautiful way.
No shame.
They sat side
no
by
secrets.
side,
Her
just
head on his
gratitude.
shoulder. No
As
need
they
for
turned the
words.
corner,
Amara
love didn't
paused and
arrive
whispered
in a limousine.
I once told
It
God
came
I'd do
slowly
anything to feel
through
safe
pain,
again.
patience,
I didn't
and
know he
meals
was
shared
sending
on plastic
twice.
stools.
The
A
rain
few
grew
months later,
heavier.
they had
and
small
Chisholm began
engagement
dancing
in her
the puddles,
compound, spinning
no
in
celebrities,
circles, as
no
if her feet
headlines.
remembered what sorrow
Just
felt
neighbors,
like,
some
and were
jollof rice,
choosing joy
and
instead.
loud children playing
Damien
with balloons.
and Amara watched
Damien's
her in
friends were
silence.
shocked.
He
No
reached for
Banana
Amara's
Island
hand,
ballroom,
and
this
no
time
designer dress.
she didn't flinch.
But he didn't care.
No more pain.
He had found
said
his
softly.
peace
In a
only
place
growth.
they all
She
ignored.
nodded.
And
He bought a
love,
small building
the kind
nearby,
that doesn't break,
and turned it into
They
Ngozi's
stood there,
dream,
drenched,
a buka-style
laughing,
restaurant
alive,
named Heart
3
and
stories,
stitched back
and
together
every
by
day
faith,
after work,
forgiveness,
he came
and
there,
faith.
not as a
It
billionaire,
didn't matter that it had
but as her
taken
man.
years. Sitting
What
by the
mattered
door
was
peeling
that they
onions
had made
with
it,
pride,
not as the
because
people they
in
once
a
were,
world
but
obsessed
as the
with
family they
noise.
chose to
Their
become.
love
And
remained
so,
quiet
under the same
and eternal.
Lagos
Thank
rain
you for
that
watching
once
this video.
introduced them through
What did you
heartbreak.
learn from this
They
story?
found healing.
Drop it in the
Walking
comments.
into the storm
Please
together.
make sure you
No
like,
longer
comment,
running from it.
and subscribe
Thank
to
you
my
for
YouTube
watching
channel,
this video.
Tochi Stories.
What
for
did you
more.
learn from this story?
Drop it in the comments. Please make sure
sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.